Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this REL Pacific webinar, Transition Course Development in the Pacific Region. I'm Kirsten Miller, and I will be your facilitator today. I am a Communications Manager at REL Pacific, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Max Altman, who will be your presenter today, and Betsy Calloway, who is serving as our technical facilitator. So if you're having any kind of trouble with your audio or any other issues, please feel free to send Betsy a note in the chat box and we'll do our best to get that squared away. So just a couple of housekeeping issues to start. If you haven't attended a webinar using Zoom before, it's a little different than some of the other platforms that you might be familiar with. It's a less formal platform and there are fewer restrictions on participant access. So it's easier for us to run into technical difficulties when people click around and explore the functionality of the software. So we're going to ask you to limit yourself to using the chat box feature, but we would like you to use that chat box feature liberally. Please ask any questions throughout. We do have time for questions at the end, but anything that comes to mind that you'd like to share, we would love to hear it, and I will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So next, let me briefly introduce Max and tell you a little bit about REL Pacific before we jump into our content. Max, as you can see on your screen there, he's got his video going. He is a managing researcher at REL Pacific, and he provides research and consultation support for quite a few projects under the REL Pacific contract. He oversees all of our training, coaching, and technical support work, and then he travels and works with a number of stakeholders for several of those projects, including in the areas of college and career readiness, professional learning, and early literacy. Max holds a PhD in Educational Administration and Policy from the University of Michigan and a BS in Secondary Education and Mathematics from Vanderbilt University. So moving along, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a bit about REL Pacific and the laboratory program in case you're not familiar with this yet. On this slide, you can see that we are one of 10 regional educational laboratories funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. Most of those are mainland-based. We're a bit unique in that respect. And this map illustrates all 10 of those regions, color-coded. But this next map shows you where we work. So we serve educators in the state of Hawaii, 3 U.S. territories, which include American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and then 3 independent nations in free association with the U.S., and those are the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, which includes Košiai, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Yap, and also the Republic of Palau. So within this region, our work focuses on research practice partnerships and really focuses on several distinct priority areas: college and career readiness and success, where we work to align system expectations for K-12 graduates with entry into college and the workforce, and that's going to be the focus of our conversations today around transition course development. Professional learning, which is all about collaborating with teachers and system leaders to create professional learning that's not just something that we do to teachers, which as I'm sure you know, is sometimes how we approach professional development, but it's really something where teacher professional learning is welcome and it works, and there's a lot of buy-in from the teachers themselves. And we also focus on early learning and early literacy, and that's about developing those language skills and literacy goals in multilingual contexts for early elementary students. And what underlies all of this is a focus on Pacific cultures and education, because it's so important that integration and cultivation of local cultures, it's so central to students' education outcomes and system improvement efforts. So we are always very aware of that as we're doing our work in the region. We've also recently expanded our work to include project focuses on a couple of other areas. Those are language policy and social and emotional learning. We do have a social and emotional learning webinar coming up on June 24th. We'd love to have you join us for that also. So that's a little bit about what we do and where we work. Next, I'm just going to briefly go over our agenda. And as you can see from this, we do have a lot of content to cover today, but we have built in quite a bit of time for conversation and for questions. So once I review the objectives that are coming up on this next slide, Max will take over And he'll tell you a little bit about research on developmental education, and then how that's applied to our partnerships goals for developing transition courses and how they're going about implementing those transition courses and reaching those goals. I did notice on our participant list that we do have at least one participant from a partnership in the CNMI that's doing this important work, and so hopefully we'll have some time for some conversation there. And please, definitely feel free, again, anybody to weigh in with any questions or comments. And we will keep moving here. So our objectives are fairly simple. We've got two objectives. To learn about research-based promising practices for effective transition course development. And again, that's sort of through that lens where we are trying to ensure that high school students are prepared for the rigors of college coursework right out the gate, that they don't require any developmental courses or any extra support going into college. And then our second objective is to learn about REL Pacific's work in support of transition course development in the Pacific region. And that word support is very important. Our partnerships on the ground are working very hard and really doing the lion's share of that work. We are here to support them in that work. So from there, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and we'll give Max a moment to bring his screen up. Please bear with us while we do that. It takes just a moment.
All right, let's see if we can get this to work. Kirsten, does it look like my screen is displaying?
It does, looks good, yep.
All right, so thank you so much, Kirsten, for the introduction to who I am and what REL Pacific does. I will talk a little bit coming up about how the things that Kirsten mentioned specifically apply to our work with a few partners around transition courses. But I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about what transition courses are. And before I do that, to go through just two important terms that I'm going to be using quite a bit. Many of you may know these terms already, but there are two different kinds of courses that students typically take in college. Developmental courses, sometimes called remedial courses, and then credit-bearing courses. Developmental courses are courses for students who have been deemed unprepared, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute, for credit-bearing courses. In other words, they're courses that a student would take at college, but they do not provide college credit. So if a student needs a certain number of math credits to graduate, no matter how many developmental courses are taken, no math credits will be earned until a student enters credit-bearing courses, which do count toward graduation and provide normal credit opportunities to students. So why the distinction? Well, research shows that 60% of students who enter college in the US haven't been appropriately prepared for college-level mathematics. Now, first of all, when people think students haven't been appropriately prepared, they often think they don't know the math, they don't know the content, and this is in fact a large part of what supported the development of the idea of developmental coursework. That students are entering college and they don't know how to do the things they need to know how to do to participate in the credit math courses as designed. So they need to take these prior developmental courses to learn that content. However, far beyond content, there are a number of reasons that students might not be prepared for college, and I want to focus on some of them because this relates directly to the work that we are doing around transition course implementation in the Pacific. So, many of you who have interacted recently with students or teachers probably already have a sense that, in fact, many students do see particular content areas quite a few times. I think fractions is a good example. Students do fractions multiple times in middle school. They do fractions multiple times in high school. Many students also do fractions in credit math in college, and certainly they tend to make up a focus of developmental courses as well. So one might ask, and I will coming up, and have a few suggested answers and hopefully a good conversation about others. One might ask, if students have seen fractions 5 times, 6 times, maybe more by the time they get to college, how is a topic like that something they need developmental coursework in? and what is the purpose of that developmental coursework. So many students who reach college, beyond just a math content issue, have other reasons that they are unprepared to succeed in college math, that they have not been appropriately prepared by the education system and by others to succeed in college math. Now, a big part of this is that math, and this is generally true of many subjects certainly, but I think it's especially notable for math, that math is a subject that people oftentimes just don't think they can do. I'm sure all of you have at least a few times in your life heard someone say, "I'm not a math person," meaning I just don't get it. I simply don't know math. I can't do it. Now, if a student thinks that, and many students do, because the way that we teach math is structured very much, oftentimes in traditional education, in a way where students tend to hear, you should get this, you should be able to do this, you just need to know it. But the math isn't necessarily linked to any purposeful action. So students begin to see themselves, if they didn't understand at first this sort of decontextualized math, as someone who just doesn't know how to do math, and the attitudes that we tend to have in society that they might be hearing from their families, they might be hearing from their friends, are going to support that. Sure, there are just people who just can't do math. Now, if a student enters a math course thinking that she or he just can't do math, that practice isn't going to help because she or he is not a math person, that student is likely not going to be in a place in the classroom where they feel like there is any purpose in working and working and working if they're not going to get better at math. Now, we know that in fact people do get better at math, that the brain research routinely shows is a muscle just like anything else that can continually grow and improve, even in math, in the same way that it does with other things. But many students legitimately don't feel that. So they enter with negative mindsets. They also enter without preparation for the college schedule, for the ways in which college might assign homework but not particularly discuss it or look at it for credit. There are just a lot of reasons besides content that students aren't prepared for college level math, that they don't feel successful in math, and that they haven't necessarily been successful in math in the past. So a lot of students, and the number is about that 60%. I'll talk a little more about placement and developmental education on the next slide, but a lot of students are placed into non-credit bearing courses when they enter college. In fact, 59% of students in a 2010 study of 57 community colleges were placed into developmental math. A third of them placed into developmental reading, but the number for math is almost twice that size, and that is fairly consistent with a lot of what we have seen in the Pacific as well, that math developmental placement rates are extremely high. Further, the rates of students who complete a developmental sequence, which might be up to 3 different developmental classes, each of which needs to be passed in a separate semester before a student can even enter credit math. So about a third of the students who entered developmental math in this study successfully completed the developmental sequence they had been assigned and made it to a credit math course. That doesn't mean passed a credit math course, mind you. It just means we're permitted by the college to take a credit math course. That means that 2/3 of the 60% of students in this study, 40% of all of the students in the 57 community colleges, were placed into developmental math and then did not make it into credit math at all in college. They paid for developmental courses, they took them, they may have passed 1 or 0 or 2, but not made it all the way through the 3-course or 2-course sequence they had, and they ended up with no math credit at all after likely using up grant money, repeatedly being put into situations where it was just reinforced that their negative ideas that they weren't successful math learners seemed to be true, and then left college without having had the opportunity to get a degree. And in some cases, it's just 1 math credit or 2 math credits that students need, but they never complete the developmental sequence, and they can't take those credits. So there are some definite negative outcomes that are associated with developmental education in research. Worse academic outcomes for students in general, which is likely not surprising given the sort of foundation that we've just gone through. They're less likely to complete a degree because they're less likely to have an opportunity to even take a credit course. and those who have taken credit courses aren't necessarily better prepared by developmental courses that oftentimes do, to many students that we've interacted with, just feel like a rehash of high school. And they tend to have that difficulty making it to credit-bearing courses because of the developmental sequence. And because of that, they may take a longer amount of time to graduate or not graduate at all. But beyond all of this, people often say, and it seems to make sense, right? Developmental courses still seem like a good idea. Maybe some students just aren't college material. But there are some real concerns about developmental courses that are, in some cases, sort of responded to by transition course design, and that I will talk about. And one of them is that whole aren't college material business, is that students who arrive at college and may already have a tenuous relationship with math, who then have smart adults immediately tell them you aren't ready, likely are not going to feel as if they really have much opportunity or much ability to succeed in math. Further than that, though, if we think about a student who's entering college, and let's say at a level of very low preparedness, this student struggled in earlier math classes, maybe had a teacher out for a while, didn't get along with the geometry teacher, ended up in college with some real needs around both content and sort of general mathematical quantitative reasoning. Now, if that student were to take a credit course, that student might fail the credit course, or might pass. We certainly have no way of knowing. If the student fails the credit course and then takes the same credit course again, they've now seen all the course material and would likely have a better chance of passing because they know exactly what they need to know for the course. If the student instead takes a developmental course and passes it in the first semester, that student is, I would argue, in fact, more far behind than a student who took and failed a credit course. Both the student who passed the developmental course and the student who failed the credit course have no college credit. Both the student who passed the developmental course and the student who failed the credit course are now in the same credit course. However, the student who failed the credit course just saw exactly the material that that student needs to pass. The student who took the developmental course didn't. So even passing a developmental course doesn't necessarily put a student into a better place than failing a credit course. And if you have a 3-course developmental sequence assigned to you when you get to college, that means you have to take 3 semesters of no credit developmental education to get to credit. If you've taken the same credit course that you actually need 3 times and failed it each time, you at that point certainly know whether you're improving, whether taking that credit course again seems like the good opportunity this time to really have a better sense, maybe after time 2, maybe after time 3. If you've taken 3 developmental courses, you still have no context for that credit course. And if you don't pass it right away, you're again now 4 semesters in, 2 years in, and you've been taking math constantly, but have no math credit. So one way that researchers and educators and a lot of other interested community members and stakeholders have tried to respond to this is by rethinking at both the high school and college level. I will focus on the high school level, although there's certainly much work at the college level on this, by rethinking what it means to prepare students for college. We often have this idea that students sit in a class, they're given information, they learn the information or they don't, and then they have the opportunity to test into credit math in college or what have you. Transition courses, though, are thought about a little differently. First of all, they're collaborative. So both school districts and institutions of higher education, both in the US, here in Hawaii and on the mainland, and elsewhere in the Pacific where we work, are interested in implementing mathematics courses. And the collaborative work can really align students' experiences. So I said earlier that one of the major ways that students struggle when they enter credit math or developmental math in college is that they don't know what the college experience will be like their first semester. They're used to a math class that meets 5 times a week for an hour, not once a week for 3 hours. They're used to a math class that assigns homework and checks it every day, perhaps, not one that lists sets of problems or passes out problem sets, but doesn't focus on those for such a substantial amount of time. So part of this work just came out of a conversation between school districts and institutes of higher education about how we can really support students in reaching their goals and continuing on their path without having such a giant leap between what they experience at the end of high school and what they experience at the beginning of college. So the purpose is to aid exactly those students who are considered unprepared for college level math through a variety of testing or lack of recommendations or interactions with folks, with counselors at colleges who are considered unprepared and who place into developmental education. So what is their purpose? Well, one thing that they want to do is to reduce that number, to say that being underprepared for college math is about a lot more than content. It's about having students who feel like they belong in a math class. It's about having students who understand how to ask classmates or teachers when they have questions. Some students never learn that, never feel comfortable with it. And then in a math class in developmental education in college, they find themselves feeling the same way. And now they don't necessarily even have the friends that they hang out with every day that they can at least say, did you get that? They just don't always have anyone they can really interact with around the content. So for many, many non-directly mathematical reasons, students can really be unprepared in a major way that isn't met even in developmental education. That is often very traditional and often involves, as I said, the same kind of math that students have been doing already for years. A second area is to align high school and college math curricula, as I already mentioned, to make sure that students are really transitioning, the word is purposefully used, from high school to college. They're not just being dropped at the end of high school with a big good luck in college, and then no further support as they enter and try to succeed in math in college. And a third bullet is certainly academic preparation. These courses aren't all about feeling good about yourself as a math learner, feeling like you belong. They're about understanding the content, but in a different way, in a way where students are held to high standards, not treated as sort of the bottom of the barrel who just need to have some information given to them. In a way where, in a way where students actually have the ability to see the work that they're doing as relevant to their lives. Students often ask in high school, why do I need to know this? And many teachers will try their best to answer, but the curriculum isn't designed in such a way that that answer is necessarily clear. If a student asks, why do I need to know this when they're working on rational expressions in Algebra 2 or pre-calculus? The answer is, without a lot of other math work in the future, you really don't. Rational expressions don't really tend to describe anything in real life that can be understood with only rational expressions. They describe fundamental relationships, but without ideas of change that come from calculus, just having a rational expression may come up once or twice in a student's life, certainly, but it's not going to be a major focus. Math and transition courses, even if it's something like that, that builds into other things, is clearly indicated to be relevant at the beginning so that students know why they are doing something. And they also include other components like tutoring and personalized support for students. So when transition courses are designed, in other words, they're designed to do a few things. And the major thing here is to be explicit, to explicitly tell students, you can succeed in math. Here is research that shows that students can improve in math, and we in this course are going to improve in math in this way. We're going to do it by studying this math, which is relevant and useful for this purpose, and here is how this course connects to what you will be doing in high school. You pair that with supportive professional development for teachers, many of whom may not have, especially at the developmental level, really received much support in thinking through how to best teach students who have been struggling with math when those teachers were trained at a college level where that's not always a focus. And paired with that professional learning and other things that can support the process, students really can be successful in this course, in courses like this, and in future courses that they're prepared for. So what does that mean for us within the Pacific region? The developmental education numbers in the Pacific, much like the developmental education numbers in studies in the mainland US, are concerning. A large number of students place into developmental education, and a large number of those students don't graduate. In the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, where REL Pacific did a study a few years ago, they were interested in looking at what exactly happens to students who do and don't enter developmental education. We found that more than 90% of high school graduates entering Northern Marianas College were placed into developmental math courses. And that after 4 years, only 10% of the students placed into developmental math courses graduated with a 2-year degree. In other words, 90% of students placed into developmental math, and 90% of those students hadn't graduated in 4 years. That's 81% of the students that enter the college in total. Sidetracked for more than 4 years, not necessarily because of, but certainly without not being because of developmental mathematics. The developmental mathematics courses, in some cases, kept these students from entering credit, in some cases, kept these students from graduating. And that when 90% of students are placing into the math that's designed for students who aren't ready, that isn't about the students, right? That's about the system, and that's about the support that students are being provided. So the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, along with several of our other partners, saw these data and said, we will support students better. Let's work on this. Let's think through options to ensure that we don't have 90% of students placing into developmental education, to raise our graduation rates, to raise our credit math rates, and to make students feel like they're able to be mathematically successful. In addition to Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, CNMI, we also worked with the Republic of Palau, 2 different jurisdictions in the Federated States of Micronesia, Chuuk State and Pohnpei State, and then the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or RMI. All 5 of these places were interested, after we talked through possible approaches to aligning students' experiences and supporting them in being math learners, in thinking through the approach of designing a transition course. We form college and career readiness and success partnerships that focus on issues of student college access and completion, and career access and completion as well. That's just one of our set of partnerships. As Kirsten mentioned, we also work on professional learning, we work on early reading, and a number of other things. And these partnerships really did decide that support in designing and implementing a high school level math transition course was going to be really key for helping students succeed at their local colleges. We try to build these partnerships with a range of stakeholders who are important. It shouldn't just be teachers at the high school. If the college isn't involved, if the high school isn't involved, if local community leaders aren't involved, the goal isn't necessarily going to be met. So we try to make sure that as soon as we get into the room, we've got all of the right people and maybe even some of the wrong people, because we want to make sure that if somebody might be right, if their work might be relevant, and if they are interested in this process, that they are part of the conversation. Not everyone will need to come back for the next session if they don't feel like it's appropriate, but they all can, and we keep our meetings as open as possible for that reason. So what goals is it that we're working towards? The goals vary to some extent in the places that we work. I will just walk you through a brief overview of some of the goals that each of these places have, and talk, when appropriate, about why it is that a transition course is a good way to meet this goal. You will certainly notice a number of similarities among the goals. Many of them focus on alignment. Many of them focus on collaboration. Many of them focus on student success. Those things aren't surprises. But in working with each partnership separately, we were able to design goals, and there are certainly more than appear on this brief set of lists that covers a few slides, goals that would really help them meet their specific needs and reach their own particular points of focus. We are currently working to meet those goals. I think some of them have already been met, and I very much hope and expect to continue working in that direction. So the CNMI is often given credit when we talk about transition courses for being the place where this work started. It was the earliest place that we did a study that looked at student college outcomes, and as soon as they saw the data, they said, we need to do something about this. In conversations that lasted for a couple of years. We talked through a lot of options, and this is the one that they identified. So the top bullet goal is something called an aim statement. We use a particular process called improvement science pretty frequently in our course development. It's not developed by, but supported by and frequently publicized by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. And aim statements are a key part of improvement science in that we can't work toward a goal if we don't know what it is, who it's for, when we're going to do it, and how much. So the CNMI stakeholders decided that during the 2020 to 2021 school year, 180 students in the public school system will successfully complete the transition course and are assured entry into credit math. Well, I haven't talked about that because one of the great advantages of our work in the Pacific is that we aren't in a state like, say, California, where a student graduating from a high school has 200 totally reasonable college options, of which there is really no way in general to identify a most likely one. And a student entering a college might have come from one of 300 different high schools all over the state and country. In the jurisdictions that we work in, education systems are smaller, and they're able to connect in a really meaningful way, in the sense that we can really bring in, as I said, the leadership of the school system for the jurisdiction, and the leadership of, in all but 2 of the places that we work, there's a single community college, so the leadership of the college. And they can actually sit down and come to agreements. In the CNMI, the biggest agreement that was reached is that since this course is going to be collaboratively designed by both high school and college instructors, it's designed with the agreement and a signed memorandum of understanding to state that students who complete the transition course can go immediately into credit math. They will not have to take developmental. They will not have to take a placement test. They can just enter credit math. Why? Because after the process that we've worked through, where we've designed a course that intends to give students the content they need, to share with them useful information about what it means to be a math learner, to give them a sense of belonging, to make them feel as if they're able to ask questions and work with others, that they are ready for credit math, whatever the results of one test that they may have taken on a day that they woke up with a headache, didn't get a chance to have breakfast, late getting in might say. We can't necessarily rely, as is a common topic of discussion among researchers everywhere in the world, we can't necessarily rely on a single test on a single day, but oftentimes because of the structure of colleges, that's the only real information they have other than what they get from high schools. And if they're not familiar with the high school, they don't necessarily know what that other information means. So with this collaborative course design, students are able to say, if I take this transition course and I successfully complete it, we are still in discussions about what exactly the criteria for successful completion is to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the students that will be moving to the college to credit math directly. But students can say, if I complete this course, that's where I'm going. Credit math, no developmental. I want 3 semesters or 2 semesters or 1 semester of developmental math. I can try credit immediately. They also wanted to promote student engagement and persistence. The Northern Marianas College in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands repeatedly told us that they saw students who were in courses to take the course, but that many students just had never, especially in math, been given an opportunity to see the relevance and utility of persisting. That as students make it through mathematics, many, as soon as they're done, say, well, I'm glad I'll never have to do that again. And certainly, if you want to take a nice long break from thinking mathematically after you've done a lot of thinking mathematically, you're more than welcome to. But a lack of sense that math is really about just understanding relationships in the world around us often keeps students from really pursuing it or even seeing it as something that would be pursued after you go through the process of schooling. But they didn't just want students to know math. They wanted them to have strong quantitative reasoning. We teach very little quantitative reasoning in many traditional math curriculums in high school and often in college. But that's really the meat of the mathematical thinking that a lot of students will do, is understanding relationships between quantities that really occur in the world around them. And to that end, partners in CNMI wanted to support students in seeing the math that they do as relevant to their lives and to their context. What does math mean to people? And what does math mean here in CNMI for us are two key questions that we thought through at length because we wanted to have answers for students when they asked them. Finally, given the relationship between the systems and the ability to collaborate, a goal that CNMI had for this course was to improve members' capacity to collaborate to continue to align K-12 and college experiences. This course is in the final design stages. Lessons are being written, the course is being approved by the Board of Education, and will be rolled out in the fall in CNMI. But that's not the end, right? Not only will they continue to improve the course to better support students as we learn more about student experiences, but they plan to continue to think through what courses in high school and perhaps even in college might be redesigned to better support students. How can we take what we learned through this somewhat arduous at times process that really requires a lot of thinking and system mapping and consideration before we can get down to the work of really designing the curriculum and thinking through what the lessons say? How can we learn from this process and then use it more straightforwardly in the future to do this for a lot of different kinds of math that students take? In the 2 states of the Federated States of Micronesia where we're working on this project, collaboration in Chuk is another major area of focus. They are often thinking in Chuk about how to bring business leaders in. They're a small community and they want to make sure that students are being prepared, not just to make it through college, but through college to find key local careers that they can be successful in. Careers that need students in Chuk that are currently hiring, where students can learn the mathematical and other skills that they will need to be successful in those careers. And then they want to design and implement a course that's appropriate and relevant. What does appropriate mean here? This question has come up over and over in all of our work because it's one that if we don't have an answer to, we just don't know if we're building the right course. The right course in Texas is not the right course in Chuk. Those places have very different contexts, and reaching students and making them feel mathematically successful at times can look very similar, but at times can be very different because it all needs to be about what's relevant locally. In Pohnpei State, partners were again interested in developing collaborative partnerships. And specifically, they wanted students to enroll and graduate and be successfully employed in careers to go through the whole process of high school, college, and career in a streamlined, comfortable, supported way. And they also wanted to increase alignment between the two systems in general so that they could communicate better and more effectively and with students to help prepare students for what they will be doing next in their lives. In the Republic of the Marshall Islands, we have another aim statement at the top. By 2020, 25% of students enrolled in the transition course will be eligible for credit-bearing math courses at the College of the Marshall Islands. We are again, our partners are again instituting a memorandum of understanding around this fact, but that students who complete this transition course successfully and meet all completion criteria can again move directly into credit math at the college. And 25% of students isn't enough for a final goal. This is just the 2020 goal. In 2021, they want it to be 50%. In 2022, as we continue to learn more and hopefully vastly improve and streamline the course, they want it to be 75%. They also, and certainly this has come up in each instance, want to increase collaboration and understanding between the two systems. It's always key in the places that we work to make sure that the systems, 2 or 3, however many there be, are able to really interact in a way that supports students better. They want to offer the transition course in all high schools starting this fall, and then to iteratively improve it, to give students, every student, a chance to take the course, not just a small set, and then to learn from those students' experiences and to continue to improve and better the course as they go, to shoot for that 2022 75% of students enter credit math goal. Then they are very interested in redesigning the broader K-12 math curriculum. In fact, we had discussions about ideas for some of that during the transition course design process. We tried to hold off on them to some extent so that we were able to focus on this, but that is a definite next step for our partners in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Finally, in the Republic of Palau, which had a somewhat different approach and has actually canceled the developmental education at Palau Community College, and is now looking for ways to support students who enter credit math, but students no longer do enter developmental mathematics at Palau Community College. So they want to increase the number of students who graduate with a college degree, who enter credit math but make it through the sequence that they need, to find that credit that they need in math to have that college degree. They also want to support collaboration between the two systems, and they want to eliminate the use of the Algebra 2 course by the Ministry of Education at the high school level. Well, why? One reason is the one I just gave, that much of what students do in Algebra 2, surprisingly, I think, because it's such a common course, but does not, as much as it would in, say, a quantitative reasoning class or a statistics class, directly relate to the math they will need in their lives. Students are constantly bombarded with poll numbers, with studies say within a relative degree of confidence, with can I afford this, what's my interest, with quantitative and statistical relationships. And Palau is very aggressive about thinking through what it is that students should really be learning. And even though Algebra 2 is a classic course, in removing it ultimately over time, because that isn't the direction they want their students to take. They want their students to go down a quantitative and or statistical reasoning path. And then finally, and this is key, to collect data that can be used to evaluate and improve the course. So I've mentioned evaluating and improving in most of these bullets, but it's really about designing, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but designing for data collection, building the course with an understanding that we'll want to learn from it, and building the ability to learn as much as we can and as well as we can into the actual structure of the course itself. So it's easier to collect data and easier to analyze it and easier to revise and to see what's happening and to make the course better for students. So what might this process look like is an important question, because I can tell you about a number of things about transition courses that are great, and I can tell you about a number of goals that the jurisdictions that we work with and others have had, but without an understanding of how this might happen, that we have, and we very much appreciate our partners in jurisdiction. They've puzzled through it with us. We've developed this process together. Certainly no one knew what was going to happen right at the beginning in every possible outcome, but we had a plan, we had a set of ideas, we had a backbone of improvement science to use, and drawing on those things, we really worked to design a process that was effective in the jurisdictions. So there are basically 4 different kinds of things that need to be done to build a course in all of the places that we've worked. I'll give them to you somewhat generally. And these are labeled as step 1, step 2, but these things will happen not necessarily in order subsequently like this. So formalizing agreements, the first bullet surrounding the transition course design, that might happen after the course has been designed a bit already, later on, while something in the second step of logistics about thinking through, say, dissemination might happen much earlier. But generally, there are these 4 categories of needed approaches. So the first is to organize and focus on goals, to identify agreements around who will be building the course, what the outcomes for students who pass the course will be, and so on, to assign tasks to stakeholders. We've formed them into 3 teams, one that designed the curriculum, one that built instructional supports like professional development for teachers, any kind of mentoring process or coaching process that jurisdictions are interested in instituting, opportunities for teachers to learn from one another and discuss. There is also an implementation team that thinks through possible implementation issues, and this is a major section of these steps also, and how to, in advance, prepare for them so that they can be met. Improving communication efforts is key. In many cases, in the Pacific and elsewhere, organizations located down the street don't have much opportunity to collaborate because everyone's busy and it hasn't been built in. So thinking purposefully about how we design opportunities to collaborate was a key part of the work that we did right at the beginning, to make sure the college is talking to the K-12 system, to make sure that education community stakeholders have their voices heard. And then finally, to finalize an aim statement and a set of goals for the design and implementation of the course, to make sure that we know what it is we want to do and exactly what pieces will get us to doing it. A second step or category is logistics. There are certainly a lot of logistics that needs to be considered. This isn't just borrowing of a course from a textbook, taking pre-made curriculum materials and saying we'll put it in this slot for next year. People need to be informed about the course. Students need to be recruited and interested in the course for it to be a worthwhile experience, as do their families. If families aren't given any information about why the course is useful. Why should they expect it to be? Students take many math courses that ultimately they and their families do not feel have been useful. We want to make sure that being useful as the goal is clearly communicated here. And then marketing strategies to really convince people that this course is worthwhile. To identify staffing needs and how those staffing needs will be paid for, developing budgets, developing a framework to collect data, as I mentioned, to identify a location for the pilot course, assuming the course will be piloted, to determine how long the course will be, 1 semester, 2 semesters, and then to develop really, really specifically a communication plan for everyone involved to make sure that people know what's happening, that everyone's clear on what everyone else is doing, that people know when the meetings are, if they're coming, what they're responsible for, and to keep that communication going. There's also a set of considerations in the actual course design. What does it mean to pass the course? Especially if, as we are in several of these jurisdictions, we're saying any student who passes the course can enter credit math. What does passing the course consist of? What does meeting the passing criteria mean? What do the instructors at the college want to see to know that this course has successfully built students who are ready to be successful in that credit math course? Scheduling placement tests for jurisdictions that don't require students to take a course like this, but make it available. Well, students want to know if they've placed into credit math already. If they have, they might better put their mathematical focus elsewhere in that senior year. But if they've tested at the end of their junior year, which is what many of our jurisdictions have moved to or are moving to doing, then they already know, am I bound for credit or am I bound for developmental? And that can be a real influence on their decision as to whether to take this course. Certainly to complete the course design, to name the course. If the course has an uninteresting name, maybe colleges aren't going to care about it as much. Maybe students aren't going to want to take it. So minor details, seemingly minor non-content-based details can still be really important in making sure the course does what it's supposed to do. And then developing a course description so people know what it is. Identifying how the course fits into high school graduation requirements has been complex for some of our jurisdictions. In fact, in at least one case, there were already 4 required years of math, and they ultimately decided they need to rearrange the math sequence to find a place for the course. Some institutions generally don't expect students to take math their senior year, and it's easier to slip it in as an option. But in a case like the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the example I gave that had pre-algebra, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 as their sequence, they needed to do some rearranging. They needed to drop pre-algebra down to the middle school level. They needed to figure out what was happening to the Algebra 2 content and really think through how can we fit this course into our curriculum in a way that benefits students and is useful. They need to follow the standard process to make sure the course is created and approved and implemented as needed. And there also needs to be, if this is a requirement, a student selection process, if not all students take the course, to determine not that students, for example, test into the course, but determine what sort of students, if there are limited spaces for a pilot, do we want to focus on? And how do we make sure that those students hear about the course? Finally, there needs to be follow-through. If we design an amazing course and roll it out and never talk about it again, I can guarantee you that as wonderful as it is not as good as it could be had there been successful follow-through. So a process for teachers to observe what's happening in the course, and a process for making the teachers of the course feel comfortable welcoming people into their classroom. Oftentimes, we observe teachers in a very punitive way, that if a principal's in the classroom watching a teacher, the teacher wants to do the simplest lesson possible, the one he or she really knows they're just going to nail, that's safe. How do we really support teachers in feeling comfortable in puzzling through issues of practice with others, especially in cases which apply to some of the teachers that we've worked with where they've just never had that experience, where all observation has been only a chance to be critiqued and not really a chance to grow. So how do we create that process to make sure that teachers can observe and talk with one another and really puzzle through these issues together is very important. We need to think about the integrity of the implementation by really, again, supporting teachers in feeling comfortable in engaging in what is often a new kind of practice, a more ambitious kind of practice where students aren't being asked straightforward, give me an answer and move on questions, but really thinking through mathematical topics, talking about relevance, asking hard questions that the teacher may not know the answer to because the lesson may be a real life lesson that relates to something that is currently being thought about or is important in a jurisdiction, and being comfortable with that. So teachers don't just, as is totally reasonable if they don't feel comfortable and supported, tend to switch back into what they're used to and really do follow through with the way in which this course was designed to be implemented. And then how to allow for course adaptation, to really plan to meet, to think it through, to schedule those meetings, to make sure that people are on board, to make sure that people have an understanding of how we're going to look at and think through data to make the course better. So those next steps include professional learning for faculty in the region to make sure that they feel comfortable with those strategies and that they have a sense of what the course is. Just as this course is more explicit about what students need to know to graduate from college math and what students need to know to use relevant math in their lives, a professional learning for the course is more explicit about why teachers are teaching this. Teachers often don't get that in professional learning. It's just sort of taken for granted. We teach math because we teach math. But that's much less clear and specific than the way that our partners are trying to design this professional learning to give teachers a real sense of the goals and purposes of the course. Then to launch the pilot course and to make sure that we continue to develop and design it. And finally, to implement cross-jurisdiction trainings to evaluate the course and engage in collaborative redesign. So when we evaluate and redesign, we need to make sure that that is something that has been expected during the entire process. We want to know what success means in the course so we can see if students are reaching it. It can't just mean getting an A. It has to mean that there are particular concepts and skills and mindsets that we really want to support students in developing. And we need to know more specifically than how do they do if they did develop those things, so that if they don't, we can improve the course to better support them in doing it. We need to know how we will measure the things that we want to achieve, and then we need to build, as I said, measurement opportunity into the course structure. One way that we do this is through something called a Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, also an aspect of improvement science, that can test out small changes. These are ways to quickly learn about small changes by planning one out, and then very importantly, not just doing it, but predicting what we think will happen. Oftentimes in education, I've been guilty of this myself. We plan something out, we sort of say, yeah, if it happens, things will be great. And then we watch and we're like, yeah, that sort of worked out the way I expected. But if we try to predict more clearly, what exactly do I think will come of this? If I use this particular questioning technique with students, how do I think they will respond? If they respond that way, great. But when they don't exactly as planned, we want to be able to think about why. So that's the study. We do it once we've hypothesized, and then we observe its outcomes. If other teachers are observing in a classroom, this becomes much easier. If a teacher is videotaping her or himself, this becomes much easier as well than if a teacher is trying to think it through alone in a classroom while also teaching in real time. So that's another reason we try to build in those structures. And then finally, to act on it. We have three basic options after we hypothesize, observe, and see how close what happened was to our hypothesis. If it worked terribly, we can trash it. This isn't right. This questioning sequence doesn't work at all. Let's just try something else. We can adapt it. Some good things happen, but this could be better. How do we change this to make it better? Or we can say, this did work perfectly, which is wonderful when it happens. Let's implement this exactly as designed. We did it right. And PDSAs can happen over and over. If this questioning sequence doesn't work at all and the next one works for part of what we wanted to do, but not for all of it, well then maybe we can redesign that some, and in the third instance it'll work better, and in the fourth instance it'll be exactly what we wanted. Then to answer larger questions about the course, and this is where I will end so we can hopefully have plenty of time for discussion. We think through a lot of different data collection methods. And a key point to make here is that often in education, when we think about data collection methods, we think about quantitative data collection methods, which are very important and are on this list, but are not all of the data collection options that we have. We can collect course outcome data, we can track students and do regressions on their progress. We can definitely count plenty of things, but we can also explicitly ask students and teachers, what are your experiences in this course? Again, being explicit is just the baseline of this work. Being explicit in that we really do ask students to tell us what their experiences are. Do you feel like you are more of a math learner? Do you see yourself as someone who can get better at math? Did you before? Do you feel like you collaborate with students and teachers in this class? Is that something you've done before? And to really get a sense over time of how the course is impacting students. And similarly with teachers, do you feel comfortable, confident teaching this course? What issues in your practice do you think you could use some additional support in thinking through professional development or mentorship, or just ongoing conversations about the work? We can learn from classroom artifacts and student work. All of these things that teachers often look at and consider. Teachers will think qualitatively about what students tell them, and teachers will think through certainly student work and the artifacts that are created in the classroom. But bringing this conversation up at a larger, more systematic level, where we really can look together as a broad organization at things like student work and say, what does this work show? Is this the sort of student work we want to see? If not, how do we make the course produce the sort of student work that we do want to see? Certainly, outcome data and college admissions data are key, but we can also have conversations, informal conversations that we've taken notes on. Professional learning communities, PLCs, are a major way for teachers to interact with one another about math strategies and their approaches to teaching the course. And talking with students' families, having discussions with community members, all of this is really key. And unlike a simple regression to answer a yes or no question, are these things associated? The data that we collect that are qualitative are not necessarily going to directly answer a question or directly point toward a clear solution. But by talking and thinking through them, by looking through themes, by asking follow-up questions and having follow-up conversations, we can learn so much about student experiences, especially if these instruments have already been pre-planned and have been designed specifically to help us learn exactly what we want. In one of our jurisdictions, the Marshall Islands, they are very focused on a mentorship relationship between college instructors and teachers at the high school level. So they are currently building in instruments to determine whether that mentorship relationship is effective for both mentor and teacher, and how it can be improved. That's something that they are building in right at the start. The first time the mentors go to the school to talk to the teachers, they are going to take notes that are focused on this particular question. And that's because as the relationship continues and as they work to build and to improve this structure that they have, we can just continue in an ongoing way, in an iterative way, to really learn about the course and how it's going and how the support for the course is going. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Max. This is Kirsten again. Since we have a fairly small group today, and we do have some people on who are in those partnerships in the region, I think there are two ways that we can sort of facilitate a conversation. Feel free, again, to put any questions in that chat box down on the bottom of your screen. But also, if you go into that participant list that has the couple of little heads there on the bottom of your screen, and click that, that should bring up a pop-up box where you can raise your hand. And if you have anything to say that is a little more involved that you'd rather not type, we can go ahead and unmute you. And again, I don't want to put our partners from the region on the spot, but certainly we'd love to hear from them if they have anything that they'd like to share. If not, that's fine too. And so in the interim, while we wait to see if there are any kinds of questions or comments that people would like to share, I'm going to go ahead and push out the survey link in the chat box.
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course, please.
Yeah, Max, you mentioned course relevant locally, and my understanding is you got a course content. You don't have to follow traditional textbook, and as long as it's relevant for your local students. So do you get any approval at this point?
Yes, that's a great question. And the collaboration that, if anything, I just harped on while I was talking, is the reason that we were able to create a course, that our partners were able to create a course that didn't necessarily follow that traditional math approach. That since everyone was involved in the conversation in advance, and if this is happening at the college level, it could be just a conversation among administrators, but oftentimes we find ourselves just stuck in a traditional math curriculum sequence, and there's no clear way to get out of it. We have rules about the math classes students take, we have curriculum for the math classes, and there are teachers who, sure, maybe want to make students feel like the course content is more relevant, but they don't necessarily have the resources, and in some cases they're sort of outright banned from doing it. This is what we follow, this is what students learn, these are our shared tests for our math curriculum in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, and they have those experiences. So by collaborating in advance with a range of stakeholders and making it very clear at the beginning of these conversations that what we're trying to do is something different, and that if we go down this road, it should be because we want to do something different, enabled our partners to think through, well, this is the rule, but we made the rule. So how can we adjust the rule so it's appropriate now? This question also came up with graduation requirements. In the CNMI, I know they said, well, we certainly, at the time, we only have a particular set of courses that count for math graduation. And then after some discussion, they said, well, let's change that set of courses. Without that discussion, students would be in a much worse off place with this course because it wouldn't have counted. But because we were meeting with leadership and because we had that focus at the beginning, they were able to determine what the process was to make sure that it did count.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So I think we have Maria unmuted, is that correct? Or we are going to be unmuting Maria next. Just give us one moment. Okay, it looks like Betsy is having a little difficulty. I just received a message from her. There we go. Okay, I think we have Maria unmuted. Maria, can you hear us? So we cannot hear you. So it looks like we have Maria unmuted. I don't know if she's having some difficulties on her end getting her mic connected. Or if her mic is integrated. So while we continue to see if we can troubleshoot that, is there anyone else who has any comments, any questions?
I just posted one question on chat.
Oh, okay, so I see that, thank you. So Max, that question is, do you have an agreement with the local college or four-year university?
Yes, so as I said, and we're very fortunate in the jurisdictions in which we work that there is generally, with two exceptions, one K-12 system and one college system. So the very first step in the process was to sit down at a table with the president of the college and the minister, director, secretary, depending on the jurisdiction, of the K-12 system, so that they could really, just as system leaders between them and along with any other leadership or teachers that they felt were appropriate for the conversation, to really think through what that agreement might be. And I can tell you that, about, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 months ago, when the president of Northern Marianas College and the director of education for the public school system really shook hands across a table, the two of them, and said, we agree that this is the path that students can take with this transition course. It was a really exciting moment. that we'd had these conversations and we'd had a lot of what ifs in the previous years, but it wasn't until that conversation happened. The implementation team that I mentioned that we work with has to have leadership on it. Otherwise, people can say, oh, we'll get that done, but then it gets shot down by someone in a higher position of leadership. By having the leaders who are most responsible for this, hopefully often at the top levels of the system, be part of the conversation, we can again make sure that they are prepared for and aware of the changes that will need to be made for the course to be effective. And that if they're willing to put in all the work to collaborate to design the course, that it makes sense to be ready to make it effective, not just to spend all this time with a course that sort of is, is kept down by our own system rules. So that did happen. And it was a really key moment in all of the jurisdictions when we were able to work out whatever disputes or disconnected conversations had happened in the past and find that real agreement to design a memorandum of understanding and sign off on it.
Okay, thank you, Max. We are still working behind the scenes to try and get Maria's audio up, but in the meantime, we have a question from Roberta. Thanks, Roberta, for joining us today. Good to see you on here. And that is, when you develop a new course, are you also developing a new textbook or utilizing available resources?
It's an excellent question, Roberta. We would not consider it developing a textbook, but of course, courses need materials, and we can't expect teachers to make those materials on their own. They don't have time, and besides, if we have particular goals for the course, that's going to be reflected in the materials. What we try to do then is to think through what materials are actually needed to effectively support teachers in teaching a course and students in taking it. So that definitely includes lesson plans with notes for teachers, and the instructional support team that we formed, one of the 3 teams, is also focused on thinking through what is it teachers need for this, what additional materials, what teacher versions of lesson plans are necessary, and then of course student materials. But turning that into a textbook, I think in some cases might be somewhat counterproductive, just because so many people, when they see a textbook, see something that they need to follow very closely. That a lot of times, I've seen this in some of our jurisdictions in the Pacific, and certainly in my work as a teacher on the mainland, that schools will assign a textbook. They say you have to follow this content. So we don't call what we make a textbook, and we don't try to make it into a textbook. What it is just a bound set of lessons and materials that will support teachers in teaching the lessons that have been designed and students in succeeding in those lessons. In some cases, in one case in the Marshall Islands, actually, they already have a textbook that they like, and we are pulling some materials from that textbook, but redesigning the ways in which they're taught. In other instances, like in the Northern Mariana Islands, they have drawn on some lessons from Carnegie Math Pathways, a transition course organization that has done some work at the college level on the mainland, and they're designing a lot of lessons on their own that better reflect what it is they want students to get. So the answer of how many materials and what sort of materials are created can change depending on what's available and what's needed. But I think that textbooks are often a block to change when they're presented traditionally. So we really do try not to think of it that way. Just try to think of it as very straightforwardly, what is it that teachers and students need? Here are those materials.
Great, thanks, Max. We do have a comment from Maria in the chat box. We're still having some difficulty getting her mic up. So that comment is, I am excited to see the data for the first year. I hear that seniors will take this class for a whole year.
Yes. The conversation, so for those of you who aren't aware, the Northern Mariana Islands was devastated by Typhoon U2 at the end of 2018. Many buildings were destroyed. The 95% of the College of Northern Marianas College was damaged. And we assumed that there would be a substantial interruption in the work. But our partners in that jurisdiction were so tenacious about wanting to make this happen for this fall, because they said, we have students right now who are going to enter their senior year in high school in the fall. And if we wait another year for this course, those students are not going to have this opportunity. So they focused so aggressively on it, and I think an amazing way, that just a couple of months after the typhoon hit, when it hit back in October, just a few months later, they were asking us to come back to start this work again. And we were in rooms that didn't have complete roofs at the time. So I am also very excited to see the data, because this, especially in CNMI, especially after the typhoon, this is a course that was really born of amazing hard work and dedication. And that as REL Pacific, we often have the really nice opportunity to show up and chat with people and have a training session, a workshop, a conversation, then head back and help support them remotely. But it's them that are doing the work. And you all, Maria, at NMC, have designed just such good data collection opportunities that I'm also really excited to see this data and to keep working on this course. And there's general agreement that this is going to be a good course, but it can always be a better course. And that since we've thought about how we can learn and improve it, that means that it's going to continue to get better and it's not going to stay static.
Okay, I'm able now to unmute. Can I chime in?
Yes,
absolutely, please.
Hi, so I'm Maria from NMC. I'm the Executive Director for Tinian Center. And I actually was a part of the original building of this alignment with PSS and NMC. And the beauty of this is that we've been testing juniors since the last 3 years of their level, of math level. And those data were incorporated with your research studies. And that's the result of all of these things. And we did it again this year. And the students that were basically, I think they just kind of created this transitional course like towards the end of the year. They went ahead and took a test. They got into our testing this year to see just where they're at right now. So I'm really excited because, you know, NMC needs to promote post-secondary education. Our students need to see the end of the tunnel, and I think incorporating this transitional classes to support them succeed in college is just very exciting. So thank you for helping us. And I again look forward to next year's data. So I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, Maria is just representative of the, you know, she's here at this webinar, even though she certainly has a sense of, you know, how transition course work, having been part of this work. But she's just an excellent example of how much the people in these jurisdictions, and of course it's no surprise, but how much they care about students and how much work they want to put in to make sure that they develop something that's new and different and really cool and special and not just the same regular old math.
Great, thanks Maria and Max. We have another comment and a couple of questions from Roberta. And that's as follows. Creating lessons with suggestions for resources is an excellent strategy. Do you plan to post all those plans on a website that would be accessible to teachers in the following years? And would the plans be accessible to other jurisdictions?
That's a great question. So the answer is slightly more complicated than a yes, because in at least one instance, an organization that we partnered with provided some curriculum materials, and I don't believe that those materials, most of them have been adapted pretty heavily and can likely be made available. I'm not exactly sure of the intellectual property technicalities. I would guess that not every single lesson would be able to be posted online for the public. But for you and Guam and the Pacific, I think that we can definitely, due to the structure of what it is that we do and the agreement that we already have in place with that organization, make basically all, if not completely all, of those materials available. So for interested Pacific jurisdictions that are covered under REL Pacific's work, I see no reason that you wouldn't be able to interact with effectively all of the materials. And in other cases, we will, I think as these are improved, it'll largely be up to the systems who are designing them, how publicly available they want to make them. But I can tell you, both Roberta and group at large, that certainly, you know, the people that we're working with who are excited to do this new work and to share it with their students and with their teachers and with their communities are also definitely excited to share what they've learned with others. We've got one group that's heading to a Pan-Pacific research conference in just about a month to present at a panel on the work that they've done from the Northern Mariana Islands. And so there will definitely be a lot of sharing, whether it's everything or just a lot of information about process and then all the materials that are available.
Great, thanks, Max. Okay, so I'm not seeing other questions in the chat box. Let me just
Can you share more information after this webinar to us?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Sure. So we'll be sending a follow-up email out in the next day or two, and you could respond directly to that if you have specific questions. We can also point you to other resources that are available on our website, which we are continuing to populate with updates around that work. So yeah, we would love to. We would love to stay in contact and give you as much information as we can. So
you can all see my email on the question slide, hopefully, assuming I successfully still left it up. So please send me an email. I'll be happy to give you my office number if you want to call and chat about things. I'm happy to talk about transition courses. I've spent a lot of time on them. I think they're a really, really great thing. We've had really high levels of success so far, and I'm happy to share that with anyone who wants to keep the conversation going, for sure.
And then there's another question, Max, around if whether or not there's a long-term plan in place to monitor the success of the courses and the transition program.
There is. The plan depends on the jurisdictions, and in most cases, it's still being built. I think that the focus as of now is to start with what we learned from the first iteration, in most cases the pilot, or in the case of the Marshall Islands, just the rollout in the fall of the course for seniors, and to see what that tells us about where we want to go with it next. However, we are thinking over time about what it is that we want to do with the course, and again, what the goals are, that the more we think about goals and purposes of the work, not just about one class, not just about one subject, but really about what sort of students we want to help build and create, and what it is that we want the schooling they're going through to do for them. That does help the jurisdictions that we're working in try to come up with a more long-term plan. I have no doubt that the plans will continue to be refined and changed, but they are there now, and we are starting to think through what we can learn immediately, what we'll learn a little later down the road, what data might be long in coming, but that we know we want to keep track of, and how through leadership changes and other educational needs, we can still make sure that we're giving this the amount of attention that it needs to be successful, and that we're not moving on to something else the next time a cool idea comes by, because this is a long-term process, and that is something that the jurisdictions have planned for.
Great, thanks, Max. So that looks like all we have for raised hands and questions. I'm going to go ahead and push out this survey link one more time in the chat box. That's a live link, so you can just go ahead and click on that. And we really do appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill that out and to let us know what worked well today, what you might like to see done differently. Also, anything that you might be interested in seeing us do for future webinars. I will send that link to you again with a follow-up email tomorrow. But we know that when it's right in front of you, it's we're all maybe a little bit more likely to click on it and fill that out while we're thinking about it. So we're going to leave that up for just a moment, and keep an eye here on the chat and on the participant list for just another few seconds to make sure that we have given everyone a chance to speak. But we very much appreciate your time and your attention today, and particularly this great conversation. That's been very, very rich and very interesting for all of us. So thank you again for joining us. We hope we'll see you at some other REL Pacific webinars. We have another one coming up on the 24th. And again, we appreciate your time and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.